My school goes all out for homecoming week. Each day we get to dress up in different themes and play games during lunch. It's pretty fun. I'm the student body president, so I get to organize most of the activities. It was Tuesday, and the theme was called Skittles Day. Basically, each class was assigned a different color to wear, and we do competitions like relay races and water balloon fights. Honestly, it was really fun. I'm a senior, which meant I was wearing orange like the rest of my grade. We had just lost our relay race with the sophomores, so everyone was a little disappointed. The bell rang and we had to go back to class. I was still outside cleaning up when the principal made an announcement that there was an immediate lockdown. We'd have to stay in our classrooms until further notice. He didn't give us a reason, but his voice sounded a little panicked. I started to get scared because I was still in the courtyard and no one else was around. I ran to the door, but it had already been locked. I was trapped outside and I had no idea what was going on. I didn't want to knock on the door because I didn't want to draw attention to myself if there was some kind of threat inside. I figured the best thing I could do was hide behind the lunchroom and wait until the principal announced that everything was okay. My phone was back in my locker, so I couldn't call anyone for help. I was crouched down behind the dumpsters, praying that I was safe. I waited for a long time, but there was no further announcement. After about 10 minutes, I got up to see if there was anyone else in the courtyard. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then, I noticed a police officer patrolling around the edge of the building. I stayed where I was, but I waved at him when he glanced in my direction. He marched over right away and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine and asked him what was going on. He explained that there had been a bomb threat, so all the students had to stay inside while he and the other officers checked the school grounds. I thought that was a little strange. We'd had bomb threats before, and even though they were false alarms, we always had to evacuate the building. It didn't make sense that the students would have to stay inside the building if there was the possibility of a bomb. He must have noticed my confusion, because he said that the potential bomb was somewhere in the courtyard, so the safest place for everyone was back inside. I started to panic. We were in the courtyard. He told me not to worry. All I had to do was follow him back to his police car and wait there until the whole area was checked. He grabbed my arm and started guiding me back toward the parking lot. I was still nervous, but I felt a lot safer with the policeman. As we walked, he told me how lucky I was that he found me. Just as we stepped out into the parking lot, the speaker came back on for another announcement. I could hear the principal's voice. "Attention students, please remain in your classrooms. There's a dangerous man on the premises posing as a police officer. If you see him through a window, please tell your teacher right away." I froze, realizing that this man wasn't really a policeman. He looked at me and tightened his grip on my arm. "Don't say a word." I wanted to scream for help, but I saw the gun on his hip. I knew he'd hurt me if I struggled at all, so I kept walking with him. He was leading me toward a beat-up Nissan, obviously not a cop car. He pushed me toward it and ordered me to get inside. I was too scared to move. "Get inside!" he screamed. My hands shaking, I reached for the door. He smiled and waited as I opened it. Then, a loud voice shouted at us from a distance. "Get away from her!" I looked up and saw that the real police had arrived. There were at least 8 of them, all pointing their guns at the man. I dove to the ground and waited for gunshots. I didn't hear anything. When I looked up, the police had already swarmed around the imposter and wrestled him to the ground. I stayed on the pavement as they shoved him into a real police car and drove away. 2 of the real officers came up to me and checked for injuries. Aside from a bruise on my arm, I was okay. They asked if I wanted them to drive me back home, but I refused. I knew they were there to help, but I still didn't feel safe. I said I'd rather go back inside and be with my classmates. They understood and let me go, apologizing for what I'd just been through. When I got inside, the entire senior class was waiting for me. It was like a sea of orange. They ran toward me and wrapped me in the biggest group hug. I was sobbing, but I finally felt safe. I was a junior when my university went into the only lockdown in its history so far. Hopefully it stays that way because it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. At the time, I had a job as a radio personality for my school's radio station, and I was a popular one. Not only did I play popular tunes, but I would start discussions about various topics. Think those popular Ask Reddit channels on YouTube, and invite listeners to call into the radio station with stories based on said various topics. It was a job I held all 4 years I attended, and I loved every minute of it. Except the lockdown, that is. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was doing my job when I got a text from the university police saying that the school was under lockdown and to get to a secure building. Right away, my radio line got several calls from students who were scared. I made the executive decision to make an announcement that we were under lockdown, but to keep the party going. I kept playing music and talking about the topic at hand. Arguably, the scariest part about the lockdown is that we had no clue why we were under lockdown. Students calling in were hosting wild theories, but nobody really knew anything. The radio station was in a small room in the oldest building on campus and was most times a one-man operation. I made sure the door was locked before fielding calls and putting on playlists. While I sat there, I got the odd sense that somebody was on the other side of the locked door. I wasn't worried as I wasn't the only one in the building. At least, I wasn't worried until the doorknob started jiggling. I about jumped out of my skin, but since the microphone was on, I didn't feel safe to scream out. I decided to ignore it, but shut off the microphone. Then, the person started banging on the door. They didn't call out or anything. They just started pounding on the door. I ducked behind the desk I was sitting at and reached for my phone to call campus police. I had to repeat myself because I was whispering. I told them that someone was banging on the radio station door, and I needed someone to come down. They asked who it was, and I told them I didn't know. The dispatcher told me to stay put and not open the door. After a minute or two, the pounding stopped, and I heard footsteps quickly moving away. I told the dispatcher that I think they were gone, but I was reassured someone was coming for me. Campus police got there within 5 minutes, as there was an officer in the building. He searched the building high and low, but couldn't find whoever it was that pounded on the door. Because I was still so freaked out, I asked him to stay nearby so he could keep an eye out. He agreed and went on his way. I still played music during the lockdown and was thanked by the officer for keeping up morale. My radio show ended up going more than 2 hours over because of the lockdown, and when the lockdown was lifted, the officer walked me back to my on-campus apartment. We've remained friends ever since and get together at least once a month. The whole reason we were put under lockdown was because 2 blocks away, a gas station was robbed at gunpoint. The perpetrator escaped and made his way onto campus, trying to blend in with the student population. Making things even scarier, he ended up hiding out in my building. However, the officer who came to help me ended up catching him 2 floors below me. I don't know what happened to him or if he's in jail or what. All I know is that I want him as far away from me as possible. I never did find out who was banging on the door, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was the robber. I've remained spooked ever since and keep my doors locked whenever I'm home alone, the police's number saved to my phone, and at least one light turned on. I hope to God I never have to endure another lockdown again. I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. It happened when I was a freshman in high school, and it started off like any other school day. I got there early, and I remember that I was dreading AP History. I always hated that course. The teacher ran it like it was a college course, and that day we had to outline 2 chapters before the end of the class and then take a pop quiz. It was our teacher's form of punishment for misbehaving for the substitute. Back then, I was what you'd call a rebel, and I had been thinking of ways to skip that class since that morning. I even attempted to play sick, but my dad didn't buy it for a single second. That was when I got the brilliant idea to skip the rest of the day. The class was my 4th period, and lunch was right before, so I could easily sneak out in the middle of the chaos of people emerging from the lunchroom. I was dead set to do this, and I had done it several times before, but I didn't realize what exactly I would be setting myself up for. I waited until it was right in the middle of the lunch block switches before I made my escape. I casually used 2 senior football players as a shield to get by unseen. I waited until I was a safe distance from the school before I took a quick right and headed towards the parking lot, hoping to take a shortcut into the main business district of my town. I couldn't just go home because I knew my dad was there. The goal was to just wait around for some time and then head back after the period ended. After finding a quiet spot, I sat and ate my own lunch before ultimately turning to head back to classes. It was back as I was about to enter a wooded area that I saw them. Cop cars, and lots of them, sirens screeching as they flew right by me and headed right towards my school. Then, my pocket started to vibrate. I didn't get it in time, but as soon as it stopped for 3 seconds, it started right back. Confused, I picked up my pace. Coming out into a spot that granted me access, I saw the cars lined up along the building and officers outside the doors. From where I was standing, they had the place locked down. I quietly went back into the wooded area and pulled out the phone. I saw that not only my dad had called, but I had numerous texts from him too. Still confused, I was hesitant to call him back. Stupid, I know. I knew that getting back inside the school was physically impossible by that point, but I still waited to see what would play out. I could hear their scanners beeping incredibly loud, but the words were garbled. Instead, I picked up my cell phone again and looked up news outlets to see if anyone was reporting, and lo and behold, someone was. I clicked the link, and what popped up was a video feed of the school and another home that was literally across the street and 2 doors down. Not even a stone's throw away, from what was being said, a domestic situation escalated, and the man had fired his gun. When cops confronted him, he fled into the woods near the school. I felt my pulse speed up and looked at the trees surrounding me. The portion of the woods that I was currently standing in felt empty, but it was woods, so there weren't necessarily clear views all around. The gravity of just how sticky of a situation I was in finally set in, and I had the sudden urge to throw up. I knew running out of the woods wasn't ideal, considering the armed men right out front, but also, there could be an armed man in there with me, so I felt trapped. I felt like I was about to hyperventilate. Then, as if on cue, I heard rustling of leaves coming from behind me. I panicked. I turned and pressed myself into the side of a tree and willed myself to be small, to be unseen. The next step was I hoped and prayed it worked. I stayed down and kept my ears trained to listen for the slightest of noises. I could hear someone in the distance still, and they sounded like they had the same idea as me. Stay down. It wasn't a comforting realization. I kept in a crouching position as I nearly duck-waddled to another tree, looking for a better angle. Still nothing. It wasn't until I went to shift once again that I caught sight of what looked like black hair. Not willing to risk it, I did the stupidest thing possible and took off in the opposite direction, back towards town. I kept running and jumping over the roots of trees. I dropped my bag too, not even caring. If it was my bag or me, I knew my dad would understand. I kept hearing the snapping of branches. I could hear someone yelling, but the words were gibberish. It wasn't until I was almost at the home stretch that I felt hands grab me. I started screaming and kicking before I zoned back into what was happening around me. The black hair I saw was a helmet worn by an officer. He quickly snatched me back, and when I went to yell, he swiveled me just enough that I saw another man being held practically at gunpoint by what appeared to be a SWAT team. Instantly, the fight left me. I went limp in his grasp. Within seconds, I watched as a beanbag got shot in the distance, and several men rushed forward, immobilizing the man. When I understood enough to look back at the man holding me, he looked really upset. I cringed. Instead of allowing me the option to return to class, he opted to drive me home in a cop car. Sure, my dad was thrilled I was safe, but when he heard why I was safe, anger took the driver's seat again. As for a punishment, I'll let you use your imagination on that one.